Welcome back, my dear friend. It's lovely to have you back here in our quiet corner, and I hope you find deep, uninterrupted peace and rest here tonight. Before we travel down to the Dales, I wanted to share a little about where tonight's fable came from. It grew out of a very quiet observation of my own during an unhurried walk at twilight down an old country lane near where I live. I happened to pass two neighbours standing near a low stone gate, wrapped in a long, heavy silence. It wasn't an angry quiet, there was no bitterness in the air, but rather the sort of silence where both people clearly wished to speak. You could see it in the way they held their shoulders, both longing to bridge a gap or offer a soft word, yet neither quite knowing how to begin. Walking home as the gathering dusk settled over the fields, it made me reflect on how many unspoken words drift through our daily lives. We carry apologies tucked quietly into our pockets, heartfelt gratitudes we forget to express aloud, and gentle thoughts we wish we had shared with those who have passed on. We hold on to them until they begin to feel heavy, almost like physical objects resting in the corners of our minds. I began to wonder what would happen if an old traveller came through our valley, someone who didn't come to judge or instruct, but simply someone with a quiet enough heart to hear those lingering, hover-soft thoughts. And more than that, how a gentle, wordless presence, like a soft cottontail rabbit sitting quietly on a garden wall, could give people the safe, unhurried space they need to finally set those burdens down. This story is a little longer tonight, meant for a deep, slow settling in. So let us step out of the busy noise of the day, leave our worries behind, and take our time as we wander down to the Red Lion Inn. Twilight arrived in the valley, not with a sudden darkening, but with a slow amber softening of the entire world. The heat of the midsummer sun had finally receded behind the high limestone scarps, leaving behind an evening air that was rich, cool and thick with the scents of the dales, damp river moss, turned black soil, and the sweet, heavy perfume of night-flowering jasmine clinging to the old stone walls of the parish. At the Red Lion Inn, set where the northern lane meets the parish crossroads, the evening routines were unfolding with their usual unhurried comfort. The old timber sign, weathered by decades of rain and sun, swung with a faint, dry creak in the breeze. One by one, the small glass panes of the taproom windows began to glow with a warm butter-yellow light as the oil lamps were trimmed and lit inside, casting long, welcoming rectangles of gold across the damp cobblestones of the yard. Inside, the low-ceilinged room felt like the soft, warm heart of the village. The great oak beams overhead were dark with age, smelling faintly of dried lavender, woodruff, and centuries of gentle wood smoke. The floorboards underfoot were wide pine, scrubbed clean every morning with sand and lavender water, yielding a subtle creak whenever someone moved across the room. From the kitchen hearth came the rich, comforting aromas of roasting root vegetables, warm barley bread, and the sweet, spiced steam of mulled cider, heating in a copper kettle above the coals. Near the corner hearth, where the fire had been reduced to a quiet bed of red embers to keep off the evening damp, sat the old traveller. He wore his many years with a lined, gracious dignity. His heavy wool coat was faded to the soft colour of wet slate, frayed ever so slightly at the cuffs, and his tall leather walking boots carried the fine white dust of the high mountain passes. Yet there was no weariness in his frame, nor any rush in his movements. He carried only a single leather satchel, softened by time and oil, which rested against the leg of his wooden bench. He sat in the high-backed oak settle with an extraordinary motionless stillness, a small earthenware mug of chamomile tea resting between his weathered hands. Most travellers who came through the dales were busy men, drovers checking their pocket watches, merchants counting their ledgers by the lamp, or stonemasons nursing tired shoulders after a day at the quarry. They moved through the world, looking intently at what lay directly ahead. But this man moved through the world by listening. He possessed a rare and quiet quality of mind, a stillness so deep that he could feel the subtle shifts in the air around him. He was attuned to the quiet residue that human life leaves behind in the places it inhabits. Where others heard only the clatter of pewter mugs, the low hum of local gossip, or the hungry scrape of a wooden spoon against a bowl, this old traveller caught the faint, weightless fragments of words that had stopped just short of being spoken. He watched the tap room with soft, caring eyes. He noticed the two old farmers sitting with their backs to each other, at separate tables, eating their vegetable soup in a silence that felt 10 years old. A silence where an unsaid, "I am sorry about that old boundary line," hung in the warm air between their spoons like a thin veil of steam. He observed the young kitchen lad who brought a fresh basket of logs to the hearth, pausing near the innkeeper's elbow, his lips parting slightly as if to ask for guidance, before the courage drained away, and he quietly stepped back into the shadows without a sound. The traveller didn't judge these silences, nor did he rush to fill them with his own voice. He simply held them in his mind, with a profound, gentle respect. He knew that the words people kept tucked in their pockets are often the most valuable things they own, and that they linger in the doorways and near the hearthstones long after the speaker has walked away, waiting for a quiet night when the air is still enough for them to finally be set free. He took a slow, comforting sip of his tea, resting his back against the high oak settle, perfectly content to wait for the valley to grow quiet around him. The night deepened over the parish with the slow, deliberate grace of an autumn stream dancing a maple leaf over its ripples. Outside the Red Lion Inn, the last carriage wheels had long since rattled away down the northern turnpike, leaving the cobblestones wrapped in a profound, unhurried calm. The breeze had died down completely, leaving the tall elderberry hedges and the broad leaves of the sycamore trees motionless against the dark, starlit sky. The traveller rose from his wooden settle near the hearth, leaving a small copper coin beside his empty tea mug. He shouldered his worn leather satchel with an unhurried motion, stepped across the threshold, and eased the heavy oak door closed behind him, until the iron latch settled into its keeper with a soft click. The village lane stretched out before him like a pale ribbon of white dust, illuminated by the clear, pearlescent glow of the moon. The air outside was cool and crisp, carrying the damp, earthen scent of night-moistened moss, fallen leaves, and the distant, metallic sharpness of the river winding through the lower meadows. Every cottage along the lane had retired for the night. Shuttered lattice windows stood dark, and only the faint, sweet trace of wood smoke drifting from chimney pots gave sign of the quiet lives resting within. The traveller walked with a slow, measured tread. His boots made no sharp sound upon the soft earth of the road, falling with a sound as faint as dry leaves settling upon wool. He was in no hurry to reach a destination. He walked simply to be present with the night, his quiet heart open to the delicate, invisible textures of the parish. As he reached the middle of the village, where the lane narrowed between two ancient whitewashed dwellings, he slowed his pace and came to a stop beside a low dry stone wall. The wall was old, built 2 centuries prior from rough, lichen-dusted limestone field stones, and served as the boundary between 2 small vegetable gardens. Yet the space above the mossy capstones felt heavy, thick with a lingering coldness that had nothing to do with the night air. For 10 years, the 2 old neighbours who lived on either side had walked past one another without a word, divided by a long-forgotten dispute over a few feet of soil along the bean trellis. Standing quietly in the moonlight, his hands resting lightly upon his satchel strap, the traveller listened to the air near the garden gate. He caught the faint, hovering residue of the thoughts that filled those 2 quiet kitchens night after night. He heard the old man on the left, sitting by his dying embers, staring at the empty wooden chair opposite him, holding the unsaid truth. I missed your company far more than I ever cared about the land, but I do not know how to cross the grass. And from the cottage on the right, he felt the exact same quiet echo answering in the dark. A little further down the winding path, where the lane curved toward the old mill race, the traveller paused outside a small timber workshop. Its heavy oak shutters were barred from the inside with thick iron pins, hiding the dark room within. Here lived the village artisan, a quiet soul who spent her days working in solitary focus, carving exquisite lifelike birds and foliage from fallen cherry wood and walnut. Her work was breathtaking, full of grace and movement, yet not a single piece had ever been displayed in the village market or shown to a neighbour. Fear had locked her doors. Standing by her threshold, surrounded by the sweet, resinous scent of fresh wood shavings drifting through the door seams, the traveller felt the delicate paper-soft whisper hanging near the latch. I put my whole heart into these quiet pieces, and I am terrified that if anyone looks at them, they will find them worthless. Finally, as the village gave way to the open fields, the traveller walked down to the old timber stile that marked the edge of the parish boundary. Beside the stile, the river flowed slow and deep, its dark surface catching the silver reflection of the stars as it lapped against the mossy stone footings. Here, a young villager came to sit every evening at dusk, staring down into the dark water. The village's elder parent had passed away during the cold rains of the previous winter, leaving behind a home filled with quiet memories and a heart burdened by a heavy, unbroken silence. Standing near the weathered oak rail, where the young person's hands had rested only hours before, the traveller caught the profound, aching farewell that hung above the running water like an unbreathed sigh. You gave me everything I am, and I never once said the words out loud while you were here to hear them. The traveller stood by the river for a long time, holding these 3 human heart weights in his mind with deep, unjudging compassion. He knew that unspoken words do not fade away into nothingness. They linger in the quiet corners of the world, growing heavier with every passing season, waiting for a gentle space where they might finally be spoken and set free. Morning broke over the valley not with a burst of bright light, but with a gentle, pearlescent softening of the eastern sky. A thick, cool dew lay across the parish meadows, holding every blade of grass in a delicate crystal sleeve that sparkled softly as the sun rose above the distant limestone ridges. The early air was sharp, fresh, and deeply invigorating, carrying the crisp scent of damp bark, fallen leaves, and the sweet, heavy perfume of ripening fruit drifting from the parish orchards. The traveller walked with slow, unhurried steps down the narrow track that led into the old village orchard. The long grass brushed against the sides of his tall leather boots, leaving dark, wet trails behind him. All around him the ancient Williams and Conference pear trees stretched their heavy, knobby branches overhead, their broad green leaves rustling with a soft, rustling sound as the morning breeze moved through the canopy. There, in the sunlit shade of a great, sprawling pear tree whose roots anchored a mossy stone bank, he came upon Rosco. The little cottontail rabbit was moving peacefully through the orchard, his ears relaxed and catching the soft morning light. Rosco wore his familiar light summer waistcoat, the wool soft and neat against his downy fur. His dark, gentle eyes were fixed on the low-hanging branches, his velvet nose twitching softly as he tested the sweet aroma of the fruit. In his paws he held a small hand-woven wicker basket, lined with clean linen to protect the soft skin of the pears. Rosco moved with a quiet, practiced rhythm. He would reach up with a gentle paw, give a ripe pear a slow, subtle twist at the stem until it yielded with a soft, clean snap, and cradle it carefully into his basket. Hearing the soft crunch of approaching footsteps in the damp grass, Rosco paused. He did not startle or scurry away. He possessed the calm of the dales, recognizing in the tall stranger a spirit of quiet reverence. Rosco turned slowly, his ears lifting slightly, a warm and welcoming expression filling his kind eyes. "Good morning to you, traveller," Rosco said. He carefully set his wicker basket down upon a patch of dry clover. "The dew is rich on the grass today, and the sun promises a fine afternoon. Won't you sit a moment and rest your boots before you take to the road?" The traveller stopped, a genuine smile unfolding across his face and crinkling round his eyes. "That is a kind offer, little friend," he replied, his voice rich and low, like the sound of water flowing over smooth stones. "I would be glad to sit a while." Near the base of the old pear tree rested an overturned wooden fruit crate, weathered to a soft, silvery grey by years of rain and sun. The traveller stepped across the grass and seated himself comfortably upon the timber, unbuckling his worn leather satchel and resting it beside his boots. Rosco reached into his basket, carefully selecting a small, perfectly ripe pear. He polished its smooth golden green skin against his linen sleeve before stepping forward and offering it to the traveller with quiet hospitality. "Thank you," the man said softly, accepting the gift. For a long while no other words were spoken. The two sat together in the filtering sunlight, a small, downy creature of the valley and a quiet wanderer of the wide world, sharing a simple piece of fruit in the peaceful quiet of the morning, while the orchard gently woke up around them. The morning sun rose higher above the parish ridge, casting long golden ribbons of light across the orchard grass and warming the rough bark of the pear trees. A robin settled upon a high mossy branch nearby, tilting its head in the quiet air. But otherwise, the orchard remained wrapped in a stillness so deep you could hear the faint occasional drop of a dewdrop falling from a leaf onto the clover below. The traveller finished his pear, carefully setting the core upon a flat stone by his boots so the insects might enjoy it later. He wiped his hands on his wool sleeve and looked down at Rosco, his eyes filled with a deep understanding warmth that seemed to see right into the quiet heart of the dales. "Your valley is a peaceful place, little friend," the man said softly, his voice low and measured, carrying the calm cadence of an old river. "The hills are gentle, the lanes are clean, and the hearths burn bright. But even in the quietest places, people carry heavy burdens, not in their hands, but in their minds." Rosco sat upon a low cushion of moss, his downy paws resting neatly over his waistcoated tumblington, his ears turned forward to catch every soft word. He did not interrupt. He simply offered the stranger his full, unhurried attention. "Last night, as I walked your lanes," the traveller continued, gazing out over the sunlit orchard, "I felt the lingering weight of things left unsaid. I stood near the dry stone wall between the two old neighbours who have not spoken in 10 years. I stood outside the timber workshop of the woodcarver who hides her finest work behind iron bars. And I stood by the river stile, where a young soul sits every dusk, holding a farewell to a lost parent that was never spoken out loud." Rosco tilted his head slightly, a shadow of gentle sorrow passing through his dark eyes. 10 years is a long time to live beside a wall in silence, Rosco murmured softly. "And to hold a love or a grief inside without ever letting it breathe must feel very heavy indeed." "It is heavy," the traveller agreed gently. "And it is easy to look at such silences and think they are made of pride, or anger, or coldness. But that is rarely true. People do not stay silent because they do not care, Rosco. They stay silent because the bridge back feels too steep to walk alone. They fear that their words will come out wrong, or that too many seasons have passed, or that the other person will not understand." The traveller rested his elbows on his knees, leaning forward slightly as he looked at the little cottontail rabbit. "Unspoken things do not need grand declarations," he said, his tone carrying a profound, quiet certainty. "They do not require long speeches or clever arguments. They simply need a safe space to be born. When a heart is heavy with something left unsaid, pushing it or offering sharp advice only makes it draw further back into the shadows. What it truly needs is a gentle anchor, a quiet, unhurried presence nearby that makes the world feel safe enough for them to take the first, small, brave step. Rosco looked down at his downy paws, feeling the truth of the man's words settle deep into his chest. A quiet anchor, Rosco repeated softly. Yes, the traveller said with a warm, approving nod. You know every lane in this parish, little bunny, and every door knows your soft tread. You do not need to fix their lives or tell them what to say. You only need to offer your peaceful presence. Sit near them. Share their air without judgment or hurry. When people feel completely safe, the heavy things they carry begin to loosen all on their own. The old traveller rose slowly from the wooden fruit crate, shouldering his worn satchel once more. He looked down at Rosco with a quiet reverence, offering a gentle nod of gratitude for the morning rest and the shared pear. My path leads north over the high passes, the man said warmly. Thank you for the hospitality of your orchard, Rosco. May your evening be as peaceful as your morning. With that, the traveller turned and walked slowly down the narrow orchard track, his tall frame disappearing among the sunlit branches, leaving Rosco alone with the rustling leaves, his wicker basket of pears, and a deep, quiet purpose stirring in his heart. Rosco did not rush out of the orchard. He finished gathering his pears with slow, deliberate care, placing each golden green fruit into his wicker basket until it was comfortably full. He walked back down the grassy track with an unhurried, peaceful stride, carrying no grand plans or heavy expectations, but simply holding the calm intention to be present where the day might take him. As the afternoon sun began its gentle descent toward the western hills, casting long, soft shadows across the village lanes, Rosco made his way to the low, dry stone wall between the two neighbouring gardens. He did not knock on doors, nor did he call out into the quiet yards. He simply hopped up onto the flat, moss-cushioned capstone of the wall, setting his wicker basket down beside him. He sat in the warm afternoon sunlight, his ears relaxed, calmly nibbling on a tender leaf of wild clover he had gathered by the road. After a few quiet minutes, the first neighbour stepped out of his back door, carrying a wooden basket to pick late summer beans. Seeing the little cottontail rabbit sitting so peacefully atop the wall, he stopped in his tracks, a gentle, softening expression touching his weathered face. A moment later, hearing the faint noise of a wicker basket being placed on the stone wall, the second neighbour opened his kitchen door and stepped out onto his stone porch. He, too, paused when he saw Rosco sitting quietly between their two gardens. Both men stood in the calm afternoon air, looking at the little rabbit. The quiet, unhurried presence of the small creature seemed to absorb the old tension that had hovered over the garden for 10 long years, making the space between them feel light and safe again. In that quiet, shared moment, the first neighbour took a slow, deep breath. He looked across the mossy stones, his eyes meeting his neighbour's for the first time in a decade. "Cold wind coming off the ridge tonight," the first man said softly, his voice gravelly from years of silence, but completely free of anger. The second neighbour stood still for a second, then let out a long, quiet sigh that seemed to lift a heavy weight from his shoulders. "Aye," he replied warmly, stepping toward the wall. "Come sit by my stove, Thomas. Let us put the kettle on." Rosco watched in peaceful silence as the two men walked toward the kitchen door together. Then, with a gentle twitch of his nose, he hopped down from the stone wall, picked up his wicker basket, and continued down the lane. As the shadows lengthened into early twilight, Rosco arrived outside the woodcarver's workshop near the mill race. He stepped onto the smooth stone threshold and gave 3 soft, polite taps to the lower timber panel of the heavy door. After a moment, the iron latch lifted with a faint creak, and the shutter opened just an inch. The woodcarver looked out, her eyes cautious and anxious, guarded by years of keeping her work hidden away from the world. Rosco offered a warm, gentle smile, holding up a small hand-carved wooden spoon from his waistcoat pocket, one whose handle had chipped and left a rather rough edge. "Good evening," Rosco murmured softly. "I wondered if you might have a moment to help me smooth the edge of my favourite spoon." The woodcarver looked at the small cottontail rabbit, sensing the complete absence of hurry or judgment in his kind eyes. She stepped back, opening the door just wide enough for him to enter. Inside, the air smelled wonderfully of cedar, beeswax, and sweet wood shavings. Rosco sat quietly upon a low wooden stool while she worked at her bench with a fine piece of sandpaper. As she worked, Rosco's gaze rested upon a shelf in the corner, where an exquisite carving of a barn owl sat in the dim light, its carved feathers so delicate they seemed almost ready to rustle in the breeze. Rosco did not offer loud praise or dramatic words. He simply sat upon his stool, looking at the carving with pure, unhurried awe, his downy paw resting gently on his tumblington, in quiet, sincere appreciation. The artisan paused her sanding, watching Rosco's face. She saw no criticism in his quiet stare, only a genuine, heartfelt recognition of the beauty she had poured into the wood. The tight knot of fear that had held her heart for so many years gently dissolved. When she handed Rosco his smoothed spoon a few minutes later, her hands were steady, and a quiet smile rested on her lips. As Rosco stepped out into the lane, he turned to see her reaching out to push the heavy oak shutter wide open to the evening air, letting the village look upon her work for the very first time. Finally, as the last amber rays of sunlight faded into deep violet above the river, Rosco walked down to the old timber stile at the parish boundary. The river ran dark and quiet below, its surface reflecting the first pale stars of the evening. Sitting on the weathered oak rail was the young villager, shoulders sagging, staring silently into the running water, with the heavy weight of unspoken grief resting upon his back. Rosco did not offer advice, nor did he ask the young man to speak. He simply climbed up onto the flat wooden rail beside him, sitting shoulder to shoulder with the villager in the gathering dusk. For a long time, neither of them moved. They sat together in wordless companionship, surrounded by the soft, rhythmic lap of the river against the stones, and the faint rustle of the evening breeze through the reeds. The gentle, safe presence of the little rabbit wrapped around the young man like a warm wool blanket, making the quiet night feel gentle rather than lonely. The young villager took a slow, deep breath, his chest expanding as the heavy tightness began to give way. He looked up into the clear twilight sky, gazing at the bright evening star rising above the water, and whispered 4 simple words into the quiet air. Thank you for everything. Those unspoken words floated out across the river, carried away by the gentle water. A profound, weightless peace settled over the stile, and the young man's shoulders relaxed at last, completely unburdened. By the time Rosco turned his steps back toward Rosehip Cottage, the parish was enveloped in a deep velvet twilight. The moon had risen full and clear above the limestone scarps, painting the winding lanes in soft shades of silver and ash. A profound collective quiet seemed to rest over the dales, a light, unburdened stillness, as if the air itself had taken a long, peaceful breath and finally let it out. As Rosco opened the heavy wooden garden gate, the scent of lavender and damp river earth greeted him. The windows of Rosehip Cottage glowed like warm amber lanterns against the dark stone walls, casting soft rectangles of butter-yellow light across the mossy path. He eased the cottage door open, stepping across the smooth stone threshold into the absolute comfort of the hallway. The kitchen was filled with a rich golden warmth. A low, gentle fire purred in the hearth, its red embers casting a smooth flicker against the whitewashed stone walls and polished copper kettles. Millie Moonbeam, Berry, and Caratina were already settled in the parlour, their small forms tucked comfortably into their high-backed chairs near the hearth. The air carried the sweet, comforting aromas of dried chamomile, roasted chestnuts, and wood smoke. "Welcome home, Rosco," Millie Moonbeam murmured softly, her gentle voice matching the quiet rhythm of the evening. Rosco set his wicker basket of pears upon the scrubbed pine table, feeling a delightful heavy weariness settling into his downy paws. "Good evening, everyone," he replied warmly, stepping into the parlour. Moving with a slow, unhurried ease, the 4 companions partook of their nightly refreshment. Millie Moonbeam passed around small mugs filled with cool spring water, infused with sweet meadow mint, and slices of cucumber gathered from the garden. They drank in peaceful, comfortable silence, the refreshing liquid spreading a soothing herbal coolness through their throats and settling deep into their tumblingtons. When the mugs were set aside, Rosco stepped toward his favourite high-backed wicker armchair beside the hearth. He sank into its cushioned depths, his tired limbs feeling wonderfully soft, supported and still. He reached for a heavy, heather-purple wool blanket, drawing the soft woven fabric all the way up over his waist and chest, tucking it neatly under his chinnigan. Millie Moonbeam, Berry, and Caratina snuggled deeper into their own soft armchairs, pulling their quilts right up to their downy cheeks, their long ears relaxing completely against the soft pillows. On the wooden mantelpiece above the fire, the old brass hearth clock kept up its slow, patient conversation, its steady, rhythmic tick measuring out the quiet dark with perfect regularity. Outside, the valley lay fast asleep in absolute unburdened peace. The lanes were quiet. The heavy thoughts had been set free, and every home rested in total safety. As you let your own eyes close now, and you sink deeper into the absolute comfort and support of your own bed, let these gentle thoughts wrap around your mind, sinking in with each slow, quiet breath. My day is beautifully complete, and there is nothing left for me to do. My mind is quiet, and my heart is entirely unburdened. I am surrounded by warmth, safety, and deep, gentle comfort. I give myself full permission to let go of every lingering thought. Everything is at peace, and all is taken care of. I am ready to drift into a deep, beautiful, and unbroken sleep. Let the slow, lazy pulse of the night carry you deeper into the quiet dark. The lane is walked. The heavy thoughts are set free. The valley is fast asleep, and you are entirely safe. All was snug. All was well. Night-night.